Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. I am your host, Lynn Fields, and this week we will be highlighting Joseph Caleb. Joseph Caleb was born November 2nd, 1937. Shout out to the Scorpios. He was born in Florencedale, Alabama. His parents were Israel and Rosa Lee Caleb. His dad owned a tailor shop, and his mom was a sharecropper. So back then, troublemakers, like if anybody in your family was a sharecropper, that means everybody was sharecropping. So Joseph had two brothers, Willie Neal and Robert Lee, and he also had a sister. And so he and his siblings, they were expected to help out when it was time to pick cotton. And Joseph, it's said that he absolutely hated this chore. Like, the more cotton you pick, the more money the family can bring home. So Joseph absolutely hated this though. And he hated it so much that it's said that his sister would actually go behind him and help him pick, help him pick more cotton so that he wouldn't get in trouble for slacking. At some point, Israel and Rosalie, they separated, and Rosalie took the two boys and the two brothers and the sister and moved out to Savannah. Joseph decided to stay in Alabama. She moved to Savannah, Georgia, and Joseph stayed behind with his grandfather. He stayed behind with his grandfather because his grandfather told him, hey, if you stay behind with me for the next 5 years, in 5 years, I will sign over part of some land to you, so that you can get started and have your own land. So Joseph agreed to stay behind. But over time, the tea is that, people kind of figured out that granddad was kind of stringing Joseph along, after so many years, like he took advantage of him. And a lot of people did that back in the day. They would promise workers, land and then just not pony up in the end. So Joseph figured out that, granddad was being, less than forthcoming. So he chose to just go on to Savannah, Georgia and met up with his mom and his siblings. And he ended up completing high school in Savannah, Georgia. And there in high school, it said that he was very athletic and he ran track, he played basketball, he played baseball. But in high school, he ended up meeting a cutie. So Joseph meets this cutie named Yvonne Atkins. Now he's in 12th grade at the time. And I believe, she was in 10th grade or 11th grade. And at their high school, the seniors had the privilege of being able to leave campus and go across the street to this local takeout spot. And when Joseph shot his shot at Yvonne, she was like, go get me a hot dog to prove your love. And so Joseph went across the street because remember, he's a senior, so he can go. So he went across the street and he got this hot dog for Yvonne. And I guess it worked because, she became his lady. And, I'm just going to say right now that I am totally feeling this story because I too, like Miss Yvonne, is secretly a cat. And if you feed me, I am not leaving. That's just what it is. So Yvonne Atkins was a young lady who was from Greenville, South Carolina. And when her mom passed, she moved into Savannah, Georgia to be with some relatives. And then that's when she started going to school. And then she met Joe. So Joe graduated and he started working at this hotel. And apparently he got, a tip at this hotel that was a nickel. And just like the sharecropping, he was like, oh, hell no, I'm not about this life. So then he got another job. I believe it was at a restaurant. And at this restaurant, the family lore is that, there was an incident with a white woman at this restaurant. So I don't know exactly what the incident is, troublemakers, but when I spoke with Joseph Caleb's family, the only thing that I kind of got out of them was that whatever the incident was, I'll quote, I'll bet she won't pull another chair from behind somebody else when they're trying to sit down. End quote. So that tells me that, like, I don't know if Joseph like jumped up and slapped the shit out of the lady. I don't know if he just cussed her out. But either way, back then, you can't just be scaring the white ladies. So Joseph ended up moving down to Miami, Florida with a cousin who was working as a longshoreman. So this cousin gets Joseph a job in Miami, Florida as a longshoreman. And just like cotton picking, just like, hotel work, and just like restaurant work, Joseph absolutely hated being a longshoreman. So a neighbor hooked him up with a job on a construction site. So by this time, troublemakers, Yvonne has made her way down to Florida, and they are married now. Like, they's married now. So Joseph gets this job on the midnight shift pouring concrete. He's making $1.50 an hour. And it was a union job, but not everybody had to be in the union. And Joseph remembers that, pouring this concrete, he's making this $1.50 an hour, and he's working next to these white men who are making more than him. And they actually would ask him sometimes, hey, can you go grab me a cup of coffee? And then he would go get it. And then, but he said that, the wages that he was making, like, he could just afford to, live his life, and support he and his wife. But he's like, man, like, he's thinking, I wish I could buy coffee too. Like, I'm a man just like you're a man. I want to buy some coffee too. And the man told him, he said, y'all need to join the union. And that way, when we get raises, y'all can get raises. And Joseph said that, basically at employee orientation, the contractor was basically like, look, y'all can make this much, and keep all y'all money in y'all pocket, or y'all can give some of this money to the union, and, they just going to be taking y'all money. So he said the majority of the blacks on the job, like, they didn't see the value in the union because they needed all of their money. And all they know is that there is something coming out of their check, and they didn't understand it. So they didn't sign up. But he said that once he started talking to the white workers, and they, basically laid it all out for him and explained the game to him, he said he was on board, and he was like, yeah, I am joining this union. And so they were working in Miami Beach. He's working with the laborers. And he says that one night, there was this big, brouhaha because the manager on the job was going to remove, a black foreman, and replace him with a white foreman. So, Joseph, he got kind of pissed off about it because remember, like, Florida is the South. People forget that Florida is the South, but like, he is from Georgia and Alabama, where the racism is just like the cherry on top racism, right? So he was like, oh no, we ain't doing none of this, because now it's like the height of the civil rights movement, and like, black people are like, no, we ain't gonna take this shit. So he leads a successful walkout, and he's about 21 years old. This is 1957. And so the manager, he didn't know what to do. It's the middle of the night. So he calls out to the union hall. He calls the different, because remember guys, there's different unions on this site. And so he calls out to the union hall, and all the reps come down to talk to their men, but they were all looking to Joseph. And so he was like, look, y'all can get y'all work started if y'all just give this man back his position. And so the black guy ended up keeping his position. But as we know, troublemakers, that when we do stuff like this, we catch the attention of our union. And he caught the attention of a man named Bernie Rubin. And at the time, Bernie Rubin was the business agent for the laborers. And he, talked to Joseph, and he made him the shop steward on that project. And, the men really gravitated towards him. They really wanted to follow him, in every project that he was on, he was made a shop steward. And then one day, Bernie Rubin came up to him, and he was like, hey, why don't you run for president of the local? And he was like, no, I'm not ready to do none of that. I'm barely getting any sleep as it is. He said, but I'll be the recording secretary. So Joseph gets elected as the recording secretary. And, I'm going to put a pin in this right now, because I feel like I've said this to you guys before, troublemakers, but I'm going to say it again. The sweet spot in the union is the recording secretary, because you know everybody business, you got all the receipts, you keeping all the notes, you are in all the meetings, and as the secretary, you know all the contacts, ergo you know everybody's job. So like the president, yeah, he like sends the message of the people forward, and the VP is just there to, you know, take over when the president isn't able, but the secretary is where the power is, and I will die on that hill. But I digress. Moving along. So after, you know, his first term as a recording secretary, you know, like I said, you know, he gains more notoriety, he gains more attention, and now the men is not just Bernie Rubin pushing him. Now the men are pushing him to be president, because they're like, we want you as our president. And so he ran and he won the presidency. And the first thing he said he did was he started like recruiting all these young Black men on all these sites and making them stewards so that they can go and sign up as many members as they can. So under Joseph's leadership, the Laborers Local 478 in Miami, Florida, they grew from between 300 to 400 members into almost 6,000. You heard that right. Like they at that time were the second largest local in the United States, not just in Florida, in the United States. And this caught a lot of people's attention, guys. So when Joseph first started that job, he was under a contract where they got a raise. He started at $1.50, and at the end of that contract, they were to go to a $2.05 raise. They would have gotten raises that would have equaled about $2.05. From $1.50 to $2.05. Well, by the time Joseph negotiated their very first contract, those men went from $2.05 to almost $5 an hour in 3 years. So he was a very successful and well-known negotiator in the community. So along with these higher wages, they also established a pension fund, which they did not have before. And then they had other benefits that they negotiated, like health insurance that they didn't have before, and workman's comp. And so with everything all added up, along with the higher wages, we're looking at almost $6 an hour for these workers. And with the membership growth, now we're looking at a very, very diverse union. Now more Blacks in this area are coming to the trades in droves. Like we're talking about the local now is 85% Black and like 10% white and like 5% Latino at this time. And Joseph was very proud of this. He was very intentional about recruiting minorities into the trades. As a matter of fact, his union, they had this program in the local high schools where, you know, kids who were 16 years old and older, they could take the pre-apprenticeship classes, and when they graduated, their apprenticeship would be done, and then they could go right into union jobs. Yes, troublemakers, like this is something that existed. It needs to be brought back into these high schools because, you know, we need more electricians and less rappers and more welders and plumbers. The union also had a voluntary scholarship fund where, you know, the members voluntarily would take 1 cent per hour that they worked, put it towards the scholarship fund, and they were able to give, you know, college scholarships to some of the children of the members who were graduating high school and going into college. So this was a very popular program. The union also ran a very popular back to school program. And it wasn't just your regular, hey, come down to the church, y'all, get these free book bags and pencils. No, like it was a full on community event. Like Al Green performed there. KC and the Sunshine Band performed there. Sammy Davis Jr. showed up. Like it was like free food, free school supplies, free entertainment, all, you know, promoted and you know, promoted by and put on by, you know, Local 478.
Hey, this is Bob Odie from $1 Million Organizer. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
And troublemakers, have we mentioned the Christmas party at the Fontainebleau? So the Fontainebleau is this big, huge luxury hotel in Miami, Florida. Yes, it is still there. Look it up. But, back then, it was this big, luxurious hotel. And they, it was really popular for having, movies and TV series and were shot at that location. There were concerts that happened there, but these workers, they're still blue collar workers and they couldn't afford to actually stay there. Well, Joseph Caleb, one year, he threw a huge party for the members at the Fontainebleau Hotel. And it was the talk of the town because nobody believed that, he was going to be able to pull it off. And the workers remember that every table had a bottle of champagne on it. He told the workers, he said, put on your finest clothes, make sure all your wives have on their finest duds. He was known for being a snazzy dresser anyway. They said that he would walk around in these brown suits with gray pinstripes and a whole bunch of rings and his cool afro. And he just had this style and this, swag that just made people want to follow him. But the local wasn't all just parties and giveaways and stuff like that. These guys, these workers, they put in some serious work, and especially in the community. Joseph was known to, if something happened, a police brutality. There was one police brutality incident where, one of the workers had got jumped. And so Joseph actually, led a protest. He led a walkout from the job, with the workers to the police station, to protest the treatment of this worker, and the bosses were like, look, man, what we got to do with this? Can we please just get some work done? But Joseph was big on no, he is one of us. So this is important to us. Everything stops when one of us is hurt. Joseph was arrested one time because he led a protest at the Miami airport because they were using, non-unionized labor. And, he was arrested. The workers walked off, and led a protest the next day to protest their president being arrested because they didn't like that shit either. And, so they were big into community activism, as well. So in 1969, the Minority Contractors Association was formed. And this is basically, it was an incorporated membership body, that had a functioning e-board. And it's exactly what it sounded like. It was just a bunch of minority contractors from different trades that got together, formed an association. And what they wanted to do was to, point out and, raise awareness about, the amount of minorities that were in the trade. So they wanted to bring blacks and, minorities into the trades, as well as hold contractors accountable for making sure that they hired so many minorities for big contracts. Because remember, y'all, Florida is not like what we know of Florida now. There was a big, huge boom, a big construction boom. And, only certain people were getting hired out on certain jobs. So the Minority Contractors Association, they got together to ensure that, basically work was being doled out equally. And Joseph Caleb, he was known for riding around on different work sites and physically counting how many blacks and Latinos were on certain work sites. And if he didn't feel like it was enough there, he would shut that work site down. And whether you were a laborer or not, you put your shit down and you followed Joseph Caleb because that's the kind of power that he had. And y'all know that this kind of power did not go unnoticed. The other contractors, they did not like him at all. Joseph was so powerful that the local newspaper, the Miami Herald, they even gave him a section of the paper where every week he could write an article and just put it in the paper and just talking up the trades and trying to convince the readers to, become involved in the trades. He just wanted to educate the masses. And one contractor, when they did an article on Joseph Caleb, this one contractor, he made the comment, he said, I wouldn't say he's unfair, but he is unreasonable. He's tough. He's very tough. And the only thing he'll get from an article about him is more power. The contractor also made the statement, he's only interested in wealth and power. But Joseph, when they told Joseph what this, anonymous contractor said, Joseph said, quote, "There was a time when the only time we see politicians is when they give a job and they come by campaigning and wave. Now they want to come to our meetings. Dollars is the name of the game." And that's exactly, what Joseph preached. Like, he was like, if they want us, because y'all know unions are a very powerful voting bloc. So, troublemakers, since we're on the subject of politics, I'm going to make this real quick. One person who, jumped into the political game was a woman named Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry. Now, Gwendolyn Cherry, she was born in Miami, Florida, and her father was actually one of the first African-American doctors in the city. She attended FAMU, Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. She was a member of Sigma Gamma Rho. She was an attorney, and as a matter of fact, she became the first African-American woman to practice law in Dade County. So I guess this wasn't good enough for Miss Gwen, because Miss Gwen decides she's going to run for the Florida House of Representatives, and she decides to tap one young Joseph Caleb to be her campaign manager. And, under his leadership and his, campaigning, she won that seat. And as a matter of fact, she became the first African-American woman to win an election to the Florida legislature. And she served from 1970 to 1979. And yes, this is the kind of pull and, that Joseph had. And you lend your name and attach your name to him, then you was moving up too. And everybody knew it. So the Minority Contractors Association, they get this huge contract. They're going to, in Miami, they decide that they're going to build these low cost housing projects, basically. And, one of the jobs of the Minority Contractors Association that Joseph was a part of, they were going to make sure that, so many contractors, of course, on the job, they wanted 70 to 90% of the contractors to be Black. And this was a $1.4 million contract spread out over 7 different unions. And it was going to be 150 unit housing is what it was going to be. So, a lot of people wanted their hands, in this pot. And Joseph, he was known for not taking a bribe, like, ever. And in the middle of this big contract stuff, Joseph even headed an initiative to bring a community center to the city of Miami. On February 6, 1972, after dropping off a co-worker, after coming from out of town from a business trip in Orlando, Joseph Caleb was shot 6 times. When police came on the scene, they claimed that witnesses said they saw 3 Black men running away, and the police basically conceded and were like, well, we don't have much to go on. But the family of, Joseph Caleb, they absolutely believe even to this day that Joseph's work with these big contracts that were coming out and, the fact that the Minority Contractors Association was pushing to have more minorities on the job and have more of a say on the job is what definitely led to his death. And the more I researched this, the more I also, came to believe this, because it's the only thing that makes sense. Joseph Caleb was very well known. He still had like $700 in his sock, so he wasn't robbed. Eventually some story came out that, another union guy, he admitted to some people, he was bragging that he killed Joseph Caleb, but guess what? He's dead now. We found him dead on the side of the road. So it was all just really, really iffy. When Joseph died, he left behind Yvonne. He left behind a son, Gregory, who was 14 at the time, a son, Stanley, who was 13 at the time, a daughter named Jolitha, who was 11 years old at the time, and a daughter named Michelle, who was 3 at the time. He was 33 years old when he was killed. In 1982, an FBI agent named James Wagner testified in federal court that an FBI informant told him that a man named John Giardello, and another man named Salvatore Tricario, they were the ones who ambushed Joseph Caleb. And according to his testimony, he says that, that they were hired to kill Joseph because, he had been given Bernie Rubin some trouble. Remember, guys, Bernie Rubin was Joseph Caleb's mentor and his business agent. And apparently there was some kind of kickback scheme and some kind of, labor racketeering that was going on. And this informant said that these two men admitted to killing Joseph Caleb on behalf of Bernie Rubin and some other mafia guys. However, it was said, afterwards that, after everything came to fruition, that the mob said they probably should have just killed Bernie Rubin instead of Joseph Caleb. Joseph Caleb's funeral was so large it had to be moved from the church to the Union Hall. The local actually paid off the $32,000 that was still owed on the mortgage of the Caleb family because they didn't want them to have to suffer anything. And the Joseph Caleb Center was completed in January of 1976 and opened for business in September of 1977. It was the largest of 11 neighborhood centers in Dade County. The center housed a number of agencies, including a library, a daycare center, courtrooms, an Office of Emergency Assistance, Health and Rehabilitative Services, a Big Brothers and Big Sisters office, the Food Stamp office, the Driver's License office, the State's Attorney's office, and the Black Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida. The center is called the Joseph Caleb Center, and it is still in Miami, Florida today. As a matter of fact, there was just a big multi-million-dollar renovation done to that building. And that, Troublemakers, is the story of Joseph Caleb. I want to thank the Southern Florida chapter of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists for introducing me to Joseph Caleb. I had never heard of him before they, said his name to me. And I started, went down this rabbit hole, and they also put me in touch with his son, Stanley. So this week, I'm going to give my flowers to Stanley Caleb. Stanley Caleb actually is, he worked for 17 years in local 478, the same local as his father. And now he works for the teachers union in Miami, Florida. He is in his 60s, and he's just trying to keep the memory of his father alive. And, and I admire that. And I had a really long conversation with him, and, I'm going to help to spread the word about Joseph Caleb and raise up his name, whenever I can in all the spaces. Thank you so much, Stanley. And that, Troublemakers, thank you for listening. That is our show. Don't forget to like us, rate us, share us. And if you don't like what you hear, then tell somebody you don't like and waste their time. And if you want to give someone their flowers, please write to us. Somebody in your local, somebody in your community, write to us at resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. I will be honored to read one of your letters on a future episode. Thanks for listening, Troublemakers. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by the Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolve Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin, begin, begin. Stand together to overcome soon, and we win, we win, we